mankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have power and care and control over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and all the animals on the earth. And so God created humankind in his image. And in that image of God, he created them, male and female. And God saw everything that he had made, and indeed, it was very good. You know, it's interesting, we hear those words that come from the first book out of the Bible called Genesis, that contains the story about creation and this wonderful thing that God did in creating you and us and humankind in God's likeness. But you know, it's strange when we hear those words, and yet in light of the monologue that Joel just shared with us about the yearning and the passions to let things out, but yet we find ourselves holding them back and hiding them to be safe. Is it not working? The dimensions of human life are filled with wonderful experiences, yet at times, tremendous challenges for each of us. When I was invited to come and share with you tonight for a few moments about this thing of being real, I was immediately taken back to a defining moment in my life as a young adult, when I had the privilege of being able to serve in a school and to be one of the counselors at the junior high where I worked. So I'd like to share with you briefly tonight my experience and what over the years through that I have learned about what it means to be real. It was 7 o'clock, and the phone rang, and my wife answered the phone, and then she brought it over to me and said it was for me. So I picked up the phone and I said, "Hello." And on the other end of the line was the voice of a young girl, and she says, "Mr. Murphy, you don't know me, but I'm a student at your school." And she said, "I didn't know who else I could turn to, and so I called you because I'm seriously thinking about ending my life." And for the next hour, I listened to this young woman bear the depth of her soul and pain about what was occurring in her life and the struggle to understand why key people in her life did not love her and treated her the way that they did. You know, at first I have to admit, I thought, maybe this is a prank. But it didn't take me long to realize that there was too much pain in her voice, that this was somebody who was faking it. And so for a good hour, I tried my best as this new counselor who had gone to school, who did this training, who got a diploma, a piece of paper, who said, "You're qualified to be able to help people."
I tried my very best to get her to trust me just enough to come in and see me the next day because I knew I could help her. But you know, she just didn't trust me enough. And after an hour, we ended our conversation and we hung up. And that next day, I just waited in my office for her to come because I knew that I could get her the help that she needed. But she didn't come. But that night at home again, she called. And for another hour or two, I listened to her and I tried everything I knew to get her to trust me because I knew that I could get her help. Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, each night she called me, and I listened to the pain and the suffering and the question in her life. Why does my family not love me? There was a point about Wednesday when I was not having any success that I found myself in my own struggle because in the back of my mind there was this question for me: do I talk to her about praying? But you know something? I just kept thinking, I can help her. I know what needs to happen, and I know what I can do to get her the help that she needs. And so I kept ignoring that probing voice and thought. Until Friday night, when I had nothing else more to offer. And after about 20 minutes of listening and sharing together, I finally said to her, have you ever thought about praying and asking God for help? And bore my testimony to her of how the power of prayer had helped me in a number of times in difficult situations in my life. And then she hung up the phone on me. And she never called again. Even today, after all these years, I think about that experience. I think about this young woman walking the halls of that school, living behind the mask that she wore every day, with her friends, with her peers, sitting in that classroom, pretending that life was okay, when deep inside, her life was falling apart, and she didn't know what to do. And I struggled with that day after day after day. But you know, I began to wonder in my own self how real I was, and that when I was talking with her every night that week, and that this probing voice in back of my mind kept encouraging me to talk to her about God in prayer, but I kept hiding behind this piece of paper that identified me as being qualified to help her. And I began to wonder, am I being real? You know, it's not easy for you and me in the world in which you and I live. And in one of the videos that we had earlier tonight, the young man shared that it's tough to be real. It's tough in the culture that you and I live in to talk about being real, because in some parts of the culture we live in, people don't want to talk about being real. They want to talk about the perception of being real. You see, you and I are inundated every day with the images of what people think real looks like. The images of what it looks to be beautiful or strong or smart or cool or athletic. The images that success looks like this and failure looks like this. And you and I, and it doesn't matter what age you are, we find ourselves struggling to begin to understand what it means to be real. And so we attempt to live this image. And for many, we live the image at the expense of the emptiness of our soul. You see, the scripture that Bryce shared in the video just a bit ago from the book of Romans talks about this guy named the Apostle Paul, who actually saw what was happening in Rome at the time for these new Christians, these Jewish Christians and these Gentile Christians who were trying to figure this out and what it meant to be real in the cultures that they came from. So those who came from the Jewish tradition were living under these 613 commandments that they were required to live by, that justified them being faithful. If you live this way, this is what it means to be real. But it doesn't matter what's in your heart. And then you got this other group of people over here from another culture who were living all these other ways. And Paul saw what it was doing in their life and called on them on what it meant to be real as a new baptized member of Christ. And so I invite you to hear these words that Paul shared as he challenged them that day in his letter to the Romans. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit in without even thinking about it. Instead, give your attention to God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what He wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you. And so what's it mean for us to be real? in the culture that you and I live in the things that you and I face every day, what does it mean for us to be real? To be real begins in knowing that you are a valued and loved person who is of worth. I want you to hear that clearly. To be real begins with first knowing, feeling, acknowledging that you are a valued and loved person of worth. You see, that's the whole message that Jesus Christ came to share with us. That in the profound love that God has for each of us, you are a person of worth. And so to be real is to have the courage to be and do that is at the core of your heart. To be real is to have the courage to be the true you that God created. You know, the word courage comes from a Latin word, cor, which means heart. And when the word courage first entered into the English language, courage meant to share who you are from the wholeness of your heart. So, my friends, courage is what it takes for you and I to begin to live real. But finally, courage to be real requires you and me to be vulnerable enough to open our life to another and to trust that the other will accept us as we are. You know, this thing to be vulnerable isn't easy. It's a risk. But I can assure you that it is in the place of vulnerability where you begin to discover who you are and true love emerges. So when this young woman who called me on the phone emptied out her life and became partially vulnerable to me to share the pain of her life, and yet when she hung up on me and I never heard from her again, I want you to know that something amazing happened. You see, 10 years later, I had moved to another school far away. And at the end of the day, teachers had gone home, and I was sitting at my desk going through my mail, and I came across a letter that was hand addressed to me, and it was from Texas. I didn't know anybody from Texas, so I was immediately intrigued and ripped open the envelope and pulled out this handwritten letter. And as I began to read it, I was in awe. Because here's how the letter began. Dear Mr. Murphy, my name is Stephanie, and I am the student who called you a number of years ago and told you that I wanted to end my life because of what was happening to me at home. She says, I just had to write you and to thank you for saving my life. She said, you see, when you told me about God and you encouraged me to pray, I did. And I discovered that there was somebody who truly loved me. And in that letter, she described that even in the midst of the suffering and the pain and the abuse that she went through until she was able to get out on her own, even in the midst of all of that, she found the courage to be who she knew she was because she discovered that in God's love for her. She says, I want you to know today life is good. I'm married. I have a child. We go to church together. And I am happy. Thank you for saving my life. My friends, you and I know that I didn't do anything to save her life. All I did is finally have the courage to point her to the one who claimed her and the one who loved her authentically. This amazing thing happens when we're willing to have the courage and willing to be vulnerable enough to let God be real to us. Because when we're willing to let God be real to us, it is then that we begin to discover who we are and how we become real to another. And so tonight, as we get ready to conclude, and all that you have done tonight, and all that you will be thinking about for the rest of this week, I leave you with this question to ponder every day of the journey of your life. Who are you? Who are you? But even more, who will you choose to be in God? And God saw everything that God had made. You, all of you. And he said, indeed, it is very good.